All right, let's go ahead and get started with our bell work. We're going to go bell work, and then after our bell work today, we're going to talk a little bit about some different scenarios, a phenomenon associated with cerebral hemispheres, give us a better understanding of them, and then we're going to watch that video that I referenced yesterday, the TED Talk, the stroke of insight, which I think is some really good stuff. Okay. 3 characteristic functions associated with the left cerebral hemisphere. Ryan?
Controls the right side of the body, handles most of the language functions, helps coordinate complex body movements.
Okay, so language, complex body movements, hand on the right side of the body is kind of a given. There's one more characteristic that I'm looking for. Yep, Mr. Brown? Was that? Logic. All right, so I want you to think about the 3 L's, left, language, logic. Sound good? Easy way to remember what the left hemisphere is all about. Okay. Now, language. This is not creative language. This is right there, demonstrative language. Okay. You're not trying to, skew things and with the language there. It's just on the surface language is what we're looking at with the left side. The right hemisphere, 3 there. What do we have, Ms. Lehman?
Creative language, visual, spatial, and process music.
Good. Visual, spatial. So imagery, processing music, and then what was the other one? Creative language.
Yeah.
All right, so our creativity comes on the right-hand side, okay? One thing I want you to think about is there was a book that I read a couple years ago. It was called The Mental Game of Tennis, and it referenced the cerebral hemispheres, and it said the way that we go about teaching young people to play sports, we're doing it all the wrong way. What we have a tendency to do is we sit off to the side and we just verbalize everything. We tell them this is, try to describe for the young people, this is how you should do it, right? We use words, okay? However, whenever you're actually completing the task, what you need to do is you need to visualize it, right? You need to see it. You need to picture it. And using the right hemisphere, accessing that is going to help you to perform on a higher level, right? And so we have a tendency to do that. We have a tendency to use our brain in the wrong way when we perform tasks, right? So, for example, you ever played a sport, played a game or something like that, and you're not doing it as well as you want to do, and what do? You start self-talking, right? You start talking to yourself. And a lot of times it's negative language. You do something stupid, right? Do this, right? And when you're doing that self-talk, you're using what side of the brain, left or right? It's not creative language. You're using the left side of the brain, okay? And the authors of this text and the research that they had suggests what we need to do is we need to get rid of that, and we need to start visualizing things. We got to stop thinking in words whenever we're playing sports, and we need to start visualizing what we want to do. So that's why in baseball, we say we do 3 things before we make each and every pitch. We say we exhale, the physiological aspect of it, clear our minds, and then we exhale, visualize. We use the right cerebral hemisphere there. We want to picture in our mind what we want to accomplish, and then we have a positive self-thought, right? I'm pretty good at what I do here, right? So try to get rid of the negativity. So we're trying to access the right hemisphere while we're performing our particular task, all right? So we do that a lot for pitching, but I encourage you guys to do that in other areas as well. You can apply visualization to other things. Asher on his way out yesterday, he was telling me about situations. He's been doing some extra exercises beyond what they've done here at the high school, and he says one of the first things they did was they went through visualization practice, right? If we want to wrestle on a higher level, we got to start visualizing, using imagery that way. So it's got a lot of science, a lot of research behind it to create some success. Number 3, what part of the brain connects the 2 cerebral hemispheres? What would that be? Ms. Livia? That's the corpus callosum, right? Corpus callosum. And what did we say about left-handed people and the size of their corpus callosum yesterday? We said what? Is it 11% larger? Okay, so what you have is 2 things. You have increased connectivity speed of neuronal processing between the two hemispheres because of the larger size of the corpus callosum. And then you have less lateralization. Right? Less lateralization means you have less of the left hemisphere taking care of language, logic. The right hemisphere, creativity. Right? You have less lateralization, so the whole brain is working together.
Can I hit your keys?
Yeah.
For the APR?
Yeah, Mr. Keen, you guys done wrestling?
Not yet.
So are you still practicing? You
Yeah.
have practice next week? All right, we need to make sure that they get really far
As
off
far
to the
as the
side.
corner.
Yeah, or
Okay.
in the hallway, one or
Alright.
the other. Yeah, you'll figure it out.
Yep.
Anyway. All right, any thoughts about the bell work? Nope. All right, let's go ahead and change modes. I do encourage you to have maybe a sheet of notebook paper. I'm going to read to you a little bit today, and then we're talk about a couple examples. There's two main concepts that we want to get from our discussion today. One of them is unilateral neglect. Unilateral neglect, and the other one is called blindsight. We're going to start with unilateral neglect. See if I can find it. Here we go. Maybe this won't work. Unilateral neglect and blindsight. Maybe I'll post these. I got them in a document. Probably infringing copyright laws, but. Okay, the first concept we're going to look at is blindsight, okay? I want to remind you, when we were talking about the hindbrain, we also referred to it as what? What level? It's reptilian brain. So this is really, what we're looking at today, our objective is where does our sense of consciousness come from, right? What we're aware of in our mind. Where does it come from? So we got two different ways of approaching it today. So the reptilian brain, more of your unconscious, all right? Mind. And then your forebrain, your mammalian brain, more of your conscious mind. All right, so the first one again is blindsight. So I'm going to read a little bit of some research for you. It says, Natalie J. had brought her grandfather to see Dr. M., a neuropsychologist. Mr. J.'s stroke had left him almost completely blind. All he could see was a tiny spot in the middle of his visual field. Dr. M. had learned about Mr. J.'s condition from his neurologist and had asked Mr. J. to come to his laboratory so that he could do some tests for his research project. Dr. M. helped Mr. J. find a chair and sit down. Mr. J., who walked with the aid of cane, gave it to his granddaughter to hold for him. May I borrow that? Asked Dr. M. Natalie nodded and handed the cane to Dr. M. The phenomenon I'm studying is called blindsight, he said. Let me see if I can show you what it is. Mr. J., please look straight ahead. Keep looking that way and don't move your eyes or turn your head. I know that you can see a little bit straight ahead of you, and I don't want you to use that piece of vision for what I'm going to ask you to do. Fine. Now I'd like you to reach out with your right hand and point to what I'm holding. But I don't see anything. I'm blind, said Mr. J., obviously exasperated. I know, but please try anyway. Mr. J. shrugged his shoulders and pointed. He looked startled when his finger encountered the end of the cane, which Dr. M. was pointing towards him. Gramps, how did you do that? Asked Natalie, amazed. I thought you were blind. I am, he said emphatically. I was just luck. Let's try it again, or try it a couple more times, Mr. J., said Dr. M. Keep looking straight ahead. Fine. He reversed the cane so that the handle was pointing towards Mr. J. Now, I'd like you to grab hold of the cane. Mr. J. reached out with an open hand and grabbed hold of the cane. Good. Now put your hand down, please. He rotated the cane 90 degrees so that the handle was oriented vertically. Now reach out for it again. Mr. J did so, and as his arm came up, he turned his wrist so that his hand matched the orientation of the handle, which he grabbed a hold of again. Good, thank you. You can put your hand down now. Dr. M turned to Natalie. I'd like to test your grandfather now, but I'll be glad to talk with you later. Right? So how is this guy able to orient his hand to the direction of the cane if he can't see it? All right? So the theory behind this of blindsight is that the visual abilities that are associated with your hindbrain are still functioning, right? But the visual abilities associated with your mammalian brain, your forebrain, aren't, right? So our awareness of what we can see is no longer there, right? But what's in what we're unaware of with our hindbrain is still there. Sound good? And so we can still respond to stimuli in our environment. However, we're kind of unconscious and unaware of those things. Sound good? All right, so that's one of them. And the other concept that I want you to write down is unilateral neglect. Unilateral neglect. All right. Another example says Miss S was a 60-year-old woman with a history of high blood pressure, which was not responding well to the medication she was taking. One evening, she was sitting in her reclining chair, reading the newspaper when the phone rang. She got out of her chair and walked to the phone. As she did, she began to feel giddy, stopped to hold on to the kitchen table. She has no memory of what happened after that. The next morning, a neighbor, who usually stopped by to have coffee with Miss S, found her lying on the floor, mumbling incoherently. The neighbor called an ambulance, which took Miss S to the hospital. 2 days after her admission, I visited her in her room, along with a group of neuropsychologists and neurological residents being led by the chief of neurology. We had already been told by the neurological resident in charge of her case that Miss S had had stroke in the back part of her right side of the brain. I want to emphasize, you may write this down, it's got to be the right side of the brain, the rear portion of the brain. So again, this would be what lobe of the brain? The cerebrum. If it's back here. Occipital lobe. Okay, so it's the rear portion of the brain, the occipital lobe. Has to be the right. Can't be the left. He attached a CT scan to the illuminated viewer mounted on the wall and had showed us a white spot caused by the accumulation of blood in a particular region of the brain. About a dozen of us entered Mrs. S.'s room. She was awake but seemed a little confused. The resident greeted her and asked her how she was feeling. Fine, I guess, she said. I still don't know why I'm here. Can you see the other people in the room? Why, sure. How many are there? She turned her head to the right and began counting. She stopped when she had counted the people at the foot of her bed. 7, she reported. What about us? Asked a voice from the left of her bed. What? She said, looking at the people she had already counted. Here, to your left. No, to your left, the voice repeated. Slowly, rather reluctantly, she began turning her head to the left. The voice kept insisting, and finally, she saw who was talking. Oh, she said, I guess there are more of you. The resident approached the left side of her bed and touched her left arm. What is this? He asked. Where? She said. Here, he answered, holding up her arm and moving it gently in front of her face. Oh, well, that's an arm. An arm? Whose arm? I don't know. I guess it must be yours. No, it's yours. Look, it's a part of you. He traced it with his fingers from her arm to her shoulder. Well, if you say so, she said, still sounding unconvinced. When we returned to the residence lounge, the chief of neurology said that we had seen a classic example of unilateral neglect caused by damage to a particular part of the right side of the brain. I've seen many cases like this, he explained. People can still perceive sensations from the left side of their body. They just don't pay attention to them. A woman will put makeup on the right side of her face, and a man will shave only half of his beard. When they put on a shirt or a coat, they will use their left hand to slip it over their right arm and shoulder, but then they'll just forget about their left arm and let the garment hang from one shoulder. They also don't look at things located towards the left or even the left halves of things. Once I visited a man in a hospital room who had just finished eating breakfast. He was sitting in his bed with a tray in front of him. There was half of a pancake on his plate. Are you all done? I asked. Sure, he said. When he wasn't looking, I turned the plate around so that the uneaten part was on his right. He saw it, looked startled, and said, what the did that come from? Or where did that come from? So, what does this tell us about the brain? What does this tell us about consciousness? Right? So, if you have damage to the rear portion of the right side of the brain, the occipital lobe, you're not going to reference things and be aware of those things on your left visual field. But if something happened to come at you from your left visual field, you could respond to it. Everybody got that? Okay. So, this video that we're going to watch here in just a second with the stroke of insight, it says that our cerebral hemispheres could actually be communicated as the we inside of me. The we inside of me. It communicates the idea, the speaker here communicates the idea that The right hemisphere has a particular personality, and the left hemisphere has a particular personality. And if you really think about it, on the surface, that kind of sounds schizophrenic, right? But the reality is, the right hemisphere has its own desires, and the left hemisphere has its own desires, okay? With that split brain operation that we referenced yesterday, right? When people have, too much communication going on, and so to resolve that, get rid of the seizures, cut the corpus callosum, right? Well, there's some exceptional situations. I'll give you one other reference before we watch the video. So there's a guy that had the split brain operation, and he comes back in a couple weeks for a checkup with the doctor, and the doctor asks him, is everything going all right? And the patient says, yeah, things are going pretty well. He says, is there anything abnormal, unusual happening? And he says, now that I think of it, the other day when I was reading the book, it would seem as if my left hand had a mind of its own. All right, I'd be reading the book, I'm engrossed in the book, really interested. My left hand would take the book and close it. So I open it back up. That was a little odd. Start reading again. A few minutes later, boom, close it again. Right? So what's going on here in that situation? Why is his left hand closing the book as if it has its mind of its own? The language is associated with what side of the brain? The left hemisphere, right? So that would be more towards the right side of the body, right? The right hemisphere is creativity, right? Visual imagery, left side of the body. The right hemisphere was getting bored with the book, and so it wanted to do something else. Close the book up, right? To entertain the right brain, what kind of book should he read? Yeah, a creative book or a picture book, something filled with metaphors or something, riddles, something else, right? Just not the book he was reading, okay? A little bit more creative there, okay? He also said, I really love my wife, but something abnormal happened the other day. I went up to go kiss my wife, and all of a sudden my left arm, as if it had a mind of its own, comes up and almost hit her in the face. Right? And so we're sharing that with the doctor as well. And what does that communicate, right? On the surface, consciously, he wants to love his wife. The right hemisphere, maybe not so much. Right? Maybe he's got some underlying issues associated with that. Right? So, I'm fascinated with this concept. What we think of as our consciousness and our self-reflection and our awareness, really, through all this, these examples, kind of references saying that the left hemisphere is what we're aware of, right? And our sense of consciousness, what we think of as our consciousness is over here, right? But there's a lot of stuff that's going on over here in the right side of the brain that we don't really give it much time, right? We don't allow the right side of the brain to really take off and flourish because it's always being covered up by the left hemisphere. Sound good? So we'll watch this video, maybe see if we can get a few more insights associated with hemispheric specialization, okay? We still haven't taken the bell work quiz, have we? Is that correct? Yeah. That's not right.
I grew up to study the brain because I have a brother who has been diagnosed with a brain disorder, schizophrenia. And as a sister, and later as a scientist, I wanted to understand, why is it that I can take my dreams, I can